welcome back to a new video. This one is going to be about round ones, and before going into the content, I briefly want to say thank you for the positive feedback I've received. It's always great to hear that the content is helpful or interesting. I've still got a few more videos planned uh, regarding a few different topics, but if there are any questions or ideas for future videos, then um, they are very welcome. Alright, I'm first gonna talk a little bit about the core theory of round ones before diving into practical situations and how to apply it, because the theory really cuts down your decisions a lot and makes it very simple. I think round ones in general are quite undervalued because you can instantly lose a game if you don't play them well, or instantly win a game, or generate a big advantage at the very least, which I think uh, not too many players really consider that there's deep structural impact. I'm gonna start by going into a graphic from Matthäus' paper that shows what row the first move is played on as the first player of the game. And we can see that for the most part you would want to play on the third row, which I think is very common in human play, and also a fair deal on the fourth row, but not so much on the fifth row, which is maybe slightly surprising since a lot of players start with, for example, placing red tiles on row 5 or placing black tiles on row 5. I think those are fairly common moves, but it doesn't really happen too frequently that a play is being made on the fifth row on the first move. Now, there's something I already kind of explained in my framework video, that row 5 is not super relevant for your own scoring in comparison to row 3 and row 4, to the point that you would only really care to score 1 over the course of the game, which would be your column row 5. So it makes sense that there's much higher focus on row 3 and row 4, since they are higher scoring rows that you would want to make more plays on in future rounds. Okay, now that we know what row to play on, we can look at what colors to take. And it's mainly gonna be white tiles, a bit of blue, and a bit of black. I believe that is also not very surprising, because in general you would want to build either column 2 or column 3, and the white tiles are relevant for both column 2 and column 3, so it makes sense that it's the most used color. Blue tiles 25%, mainly because you build it middle column is the best column, so whenever blue tiles are available it is not a bad choice to just go for blues in row 3. And black tiles are of course also relevant for both of these columns, so as the first player you can also often start by taking black tiles in row 4 or black tiles in row 5, which to show would look something like this. Like, these are going to be practically all of your opening moves. Every now and then you may want to go for yellows in row 3 or reds in row 5 or blacks in row 5. Like, those are all moves that come up occasionally, but in general those are going to be your opening moves. Now the question would be if it's really any different as the second player of the game, and the answer is no. For the most part it stays the same. You would want to fill out one of those boxes. The main idea being that the second player usually has a strong counter to whatever the first player is doing. So let's say that player 1 starts building column 3 in the first round by placing blue tiles in row 3. Then a very common counter for the second player would be to place white tiles in row 3 to immediately contest the row 4 completion while also building their column row 3. As the second player, you frequently have to base your play on what your opponent is doing and disrupt them to not let them build away. Because if you're a move behind and you get less tiles than them, then you at least need to make it complicated for them and maybe force some tile imbalances where your opponent can't just build down in a straight line and generate a lot of points and get a perfect board. So that's gonna be the main idea, that that you defend actively in a way that also favors your own board. Because you don't, in most cases, you're not gonna get good enough compensation to just do whatever you want if it's unrelated to what your opponent needs. Round 1's for the most part aggressively played for the contested tiles. Um, so in whatever way your opponent may start the round, if it's for example whites in row 4, then a common counter would either be to take whites in row 3 or to actually take blues in row 3 to not allow them to just build in a straight line. If your opponent takes blacks in row 4, which would also be a common starting move, then a common counter would be to either take whites in row 3 or whites in row 4, and if your opponent takes whites in row 3, then actually the most common counter would be to just place blue tiles in row 3 and build this column, since your opponent, once they finish the row 3, they no longer really have such great use for white tiles going into the second round, that you will be able to make progress on it. Alternatively, you can still try and contest them by placing white tiles in row 4. As the second player, you generally don't have enough time to make a lot of progress on your row 5 in the first round, so a good way to think about it would be to pick a column. If you like choose what column to contest your opponent on, you would want to pick a column that has a high remaining tile count for the tiles that you require in row 5 in order to not get stuck on it. I still want to talk about top rows and how you should build in round 1, since that's going to have an impact on how the game is going to work for you in future rounds. So firstly, you can say that top rows take a little bit of a backseat in round 1, since they are much more contested tiles, as I pointed out, with the white tiles mainly, or the black tiles, um, that you usually delay your top row completion until the final moves in the first round, but they're still critical, and at times it's unavoidable to end up with poor placements, but I think you should still try to avoid setups like, for example, this one, um, because it's going to be very, very hard for you to score a lot of points, regardless of the column you're building, when your top rows are placed like this. In general, you can say that it's like the very easy shortcut would be that building from the middle is going to be the right idea, and more importantly, to build from the middle in your second row. Now, why that would be important, I already briefly talked about in my framework video. The main idea being that you can continuously build from the middle, and then in round 4, when the tile counts are low, so for example, sometimes it can happen that only one black tile remains in the final round, that way you could still place your adjacent row 2 in round 4 and then leave the whites for round 5, whereas and still complete your top row. But if you instead build from the edge, let's say, and in round 4 you realize, oh, there's only one black tile for round 5, then if you want to complete your row 2, or have a chance at that, you would have to concede all of the adjacency to make that happen, and leave the red tiles for the last round. So that's why it's quite good to build from the middle in general for situations like that. It doesn't just apply to if the tile count is super low, like 1, but also if it's 2 or 3. It might be hard to get a very specific row 2 in the final round, and you would want to have a little bit of a choice what color to you would want to leave yourself with in the fifth round in your second row. So that would be one of the reasons why it's important long term to build from the middle in your second row. But there are also some reasons that come up sooner than that. Building from the middle in row 2 is not only good because you have more adjacency options, but also because you would want to build into the middle in your row 3. So let's say you build column 2 and you start with, let's say, yellows in the second row. Generally, you would want to build into the middle, so in the second round, you could already look to potentially go for blue tiles in row 3, and row 2s will supply vertical adjacency to your row 3s. So building central is quite good, or if you're building this column, for example, if you're building middle column, then it's quite good if you're building from the middle and you have adjacent horizontal options in row 2 that will simultaneously supply adjacency to your row 3, because for vertical adjacency all that really matters is that your row 2 and your row 3 is connected, and it doesn't matter as much, or it doesn't matter at all in most cases, that when you fill in your row 1, because your row 1 is going to be connected to your row 3. So the only way in which this would matter is if you fill in the timing of your row 1 vertically would only matter if you fill in your row 5 before you fill in your row 4, which in general you would want to avoid as well. So here it would be better if you still fill in the red and then the white. That would actually be worse. You would first want to fill in the white and then you would want to fill in the red. But if your row 2 and 3 is connected with your row 4, then it doesn't really matter if you fill in when you fill in your row 1. So that's another reason why it's quite good to build from the middle and or into the middle in general over the course of the game, is that your row 2 can actually supply some adjacency. Now, how could top row setups actually look like for the specific columns? Something like this would be a great top row setup for column 2, for example, getting the red tile in row 1 that you will soon require in row 2 and also that you need in row 5. Something like that would be quite a good top row setup for the second column, since you get kind of guarantee yourself once your row 2 and row 3 is connected that you have a very easy time maximizing vertical adjacency as long as you fill in your row 4 before your row 5. So that would be a common setup that's good, but also something like this would be quite good because you create a staggered pattern and that is going to score you a lot of points. So in general, when it comes to top rows, building a staggered pattern is preferable to building in a straight line because you would score more points. So here you would get +1 for the black tiles, +1 for the yellow tiles, and when you fill in the red tiles in row 1 and 2, you would get +4 for each, so in total you would get 10 points if you build like this. But if you build differently and in the first round choose to build in a straight line in your top 2 rows, then you would only get +1, +2, and once you fill in the same tiles, +2, +4, so you would only total 9 points. You would lose a point like that, so creating the stagger in general can provide you with an extra point, and or even more, because you can do the same thing for your row 3, creating the stagger like this. So if you fill in row 1 red and row 2 blue in the next round, then you would really get a lot of adjacency. I think one setup that I recently had in a high-level game was this one, and that also worked quite well. In the second round I could fill in yellow tiles in row 2 and black tiles in row 1, and ended up getting a lot of points through top row adjacency there. The only downside of a staggered setup would be that you require very specific tiles, because if you disrupt them, like for example filling in the red first, then now you could no longer reconnect your row 2 to your row 1. It's like this, your red row 1 would then be adjacent to the row 3, and so you kind of need to follow the pattern if you want the maximum points, which makes it a little bit harder to accomplish. And of course you would already be placing the red in row 1, which still would be a fine placement in general, but you would also lose points horizontally. I think that would be the main advice I can give, that building in a straight line is not super important. Centralized row 2 building is more important than centralized row 1 building, because your row 2 is relevant for your row 3 adjacency. But preferably you just get a staggered board, like something like this, I believe would be optimal for column 3. And that's pretty much all I can say on top rows. The first player usually has an advantage going into round 1, which I think is fairly obvious when you play the game, that it's quite a bit easier as the first player. I've got an interesting graphic for that one from Dan's bot on how it would assess round 1s as the first player, so the starting position. And we can see that most of the starts are going to be advantageous for the first player, and somewhere in the 60% range. But quite interestingly, a lot of starts actually also favor the second player, which I'm not sure I trust to that degree. Looking at this one, we can see that about 25% of starts favor the second player, which to me seems quite high. But to quickly explain what runouts that would be, it would happen in fairly scattered runouts where the first player doesn't really have a meaningful choice. They don't really get any of the tiles that I showed, or at least not in a reasonable way, which would allow the second player to counter by taking the token. So there are quite a few starts that actually favor the second player, but for the most part you're playing from behind. Now on the opposite end we see that there are some starts that give the first player a win probability of 70+%. So one of these very one-sided round ones would be this game against Focus here, that I played in the last Azul Cup, and he was the first player, so he had a great choice of taking 3 black tiles, and there isn't really a good counter to it, or the counter that generally would be good against it cannot really be played reasonably. So given the tile distribution and given that all of the remaining tiles are scattered, the best play is to play them in row 5, which he did. Now, what should you do as the second player in such a situation? The truth is there isn't really a good move here, and after extensively analyzing it myself and with AI as well, the best move here is actually to take 2 yellow in row 2 and simply handing your opponent 2 white tiles and the token. If you follow it up by blacks in row 4. These moves you can also play them in a different order, it's gonna be the same. That this would actually be your best counter, which looks very, very depressing, and there simply isn't anything better that you can do other than to try and play it like this and then get some of the remaining tiles for column 2 and pray that you can outplay your opponent in future rounds. It's quite depressing, but I briefly want to talk about why the obvious counter of 1 white in row 3 doesn't work, before I'm gonna go to a little bit more balanced situations that I believe are going to be um, worth it to analyze, since you're not gonna encounter such a one-sided start all that often. So I think taking a white in row 3 kind of makes sense, because your opponent is of course gonna take the 2 blacks in row 5, so you would prefer to choose a column that requires black tiles, that doesn't really require that many black tiles, since 5 of them are already out. But of course the bad part is that you can make no progress on your row 4 in this round, and that you will be unlikely to complete it in the next round. Now you kinda have the same issue as on the first move, that once again you cannot really take from any of the platforms without giving your opponent 2 white tiles. So I don't know, if you take 2 yellows for example, then your opponent can simply take 2 white tiles, and then it will simply not be great for you no matter how you play it. Like for example, if you continue to try and unclog this row 3, then your opponent can simply ignore and grab their top row, and then if you were to take a white, they would get 3 blue in the top row and just fill their entire board in the first round. So something like that isn't really a great option. And taking the white tiles one by one is also quite depressing, because your opponent is still always gonna get a great board out of this round, no matter how you play it, because they can simply take their tiles one by one, and you never really had any strong counter to any of it. But yeah, this was mainly to exemplify that there are some bad starts where you simply don't have many choices, and this is kind of what one of them would look like. For example, here, I mean, if you take the row 3 out, then they would just finish their column in the first round practically, and if you were to allow it, then this would similarly be quite bad to go into the next round like this. It may not look that horrible, but it definitely isn't pretty. Right, first I'm gonna show round 1 I played against Dr. Benway, and here he of course has a very strong choice as the first player of playing blue tiles in row 3, which is for sure the strongest move. He takes them, and you immediately need to find a way to counter that move. So one option would be to take the token, but I think it's quite hard to take the token here, because you don't really get much in as compensation, and you really can't allow your opponent to just build away and build straight down middle column and leave them all of the relevant tiles for it. So you actually need to play more aggressively by immediately countering taking 2 blacks yourself in row 4, to create a bit of a tile imbalance, because if you don't, your opponent is simply going to build away, and you're not gonna make all that much progress yourself. So 2 blacks in 4, he takes the token, which I think is also a very common move. And now you practically can just continue the plan of trying to take out the tiles that your opponent would want the most, to make it harder for them to generate a huge advantage by simply getting a lot of column progress while still building your own board. So I take another black to focus on my row 4. The idea is also that if he was to try and deny my row 4 completion, he would be merging me white tiles, which he also wants. So it's not great for him, since I would practically take out all of his column tiles. So he starts taking white tiles by himself, which is not a good move. He probably should have just, or maybe it's a fine move, but he probably should have led that in the middle, because I would not be able to merge him to whites, or I wouldn't want to merge him to whites either to complete my row 4, so it wasn't super urgent to take that in my opinion. Either way, now I have a great choice to complete my row 4 and manage to take out all of the row 5 tiles he could have gotten in this round. He takes another white, And well, practically this is already where um, the round 1 kind of looks okay for me, since my opponent doesn't really get more tiles than that. There's only one additional white tile remaining in the round. Of course, they can still complete their row 3 and get a top row, and they have the token going into the next round. So it's still quite a decent round for them. But I do get this row 4, and I can easily complete a row 2 and a row 1. And structurally, I'm also in a good spot. So I would say the round is already went from him having a strong start uh, to something that is a lot more balanced. In this decision, I elect to take red tiles in row 2. Um, the main idea being that I still need to grab row 2, and there are 3 blues and 3 yellows remaining in the round, which I can look to merge. If he was to take a blue from this platform to complete his row 3, I would get yellows in row 3, and I would complete 4 rows and get a very flexible setup. And if he instead completes his row 3 from the middle by taking 2 blue, then I can merge the 3 yellow tiles, and he will have to deny them and lose all of his points if he doesn't want me to get this row 3. And of course, if he does anything else, then I can simply merge those tiles and make it expensive for him. Right, and here I choose to take another red tile because it would be the preferred top row for both of us. Well, mainly to merge the 3 yellow tiles, but taking the red tile in row 1 is of course very nice for me because now I can always remain somewhat flexible in committing reds into row 5. And I actually have a great shot at building column 2, also forcing him to make another decision between taking the yellow tiles to not give me this row 3 or to take a white tile. So I've got 2 good remaining moves of either taking the white or the 3 yellow, and he's gonna have, and he chose to take the white. I think in this situation getting 1 white for him is not super meaningful. Instead I probably would have looked to defend the row 3 that I can now place, because if he was to take the yellow in row 1, he would have a better top row setup going into the next round. And also, he would need 2 whites in row 4 with the token, and I would probably play the white in row 3, since I do need to complete this row 3 sooner or later. And I would want to preferably get it early in the game, so I would probably end up placing the white, even though it can be contested by him in the next round with the token. But in a situation like this, it's actually somewhat beneficial for him to need 2 whites in row 4 rather than just 1, because that will make it a lot easier for him to actually defend my row 3 completion in the next round. And going out of the round like this, I think, is already advantageous for me, since I complete 4 rows, have a completely flexible board, and even though my opponent's board looks good, he did take a few discards as well, which definitely gives me a little bit of an advantage, even though it's still fairly balanced. Here I've got a very nice round 1, where the first decision is already interesting. So there's a 3-strike of red tiles and plenty more red tiles that are in the round, but there are also 6 blue tiles in the round that you could immediately use to start building row 3. Now, what should you start with? I believe that taking 2 blue here is the strongest move, because it kind of puts you in a great position regardless of what your opponent does. So I start to take 2 blues, and of course if your opponent was to take 3 red tiles in row 5 for example, then I would simply get 2 white and a token, and get a perfect setup going into the next round. Have the token, which is going to be quite relevant since my opponent, if they build column 2, would want black tiles in row 4 and I would want to get them in row 5. Higher odds of an uneven or like an imbalanced distribution with not many black tiles coming out in the first round. So getting 2 white in the token, whites being also very contested for this particular column, would just be a dream start for me. Which is why I think that taking 2 blue is quite a strong option. And my opponent's best move here is to actually just take the white and the token in row 4 to immediately counter my build of just building down middle column and gaining a huge advantage. After which I could still take 3 red tiles in row 5 and then simply get as many tiles on my board as possible, since my opponent has kind of disrupted my idea of building down middle column by contesting the white tiles. So this would be, without going into the specific lines, that would often end with me potentially completing row 1, 2, 3, and 5 in the first round, and even if they are misaligned, that is going to be quite an insane start. But my opponent instead took the 3 red tiles, which allows me to follow up by taking the white tiles, and now I just get a very, very strong start where I'm practically building away. Alright, he takes a red tile, and I simply complete my row 3. The main idea is that I don't really want to merge tiles in this situation, so I can still get preferably the row 2 in the row 2 yellow for vertical adjacency and also an easier time building in future rounds. And now I think it's time for me to simply grab a yellow tile. If my opponent plays something like 2 blues in row 2, I can take a yellow tile from the platform and make them go last, and that way I just get a very, very strong setup going into the next round. And yellow is definitely going to be the preferred row 2 that I would want here. My opponent instead plays an interesting move, which is to take a yellow in row 1 to force me into taking the yellow, in which case I would be stuck with the last move and kind of like giving them what they want. So if I take a yellow, he would probably take to red in row 2, and then I would end up with the blue tiles in row 1, because I can't really allow him this row 3 completion, meaning that I would end up losing all of my points in a round, and he would kind of get a pretty good setup, which is why I played a different move. I think there are multiple options here, but I opted to take a red tile in row 1, since my opponent doesn't really have any good way of denying me the yellow tile, and also there's only one available row 2 or row 3 option wherever he would decide to play them with the blue tiles for him. So I think that's quite a nice tactical idea to not really let your opponent force your move, and instead focus on driving a bigger gap between the two players. So I take the red tile, and now his best move is probably to just take away my row 2, because if he was to give it to me, then, well, I would just get a perfect setup, and that wouldn't be great for him. So he discards it. I can, of course, discard the blue tiles now. That way he doesn't get any row 2 or row 3 progress either. And here he should probably just take the black tile and place it in row 4, but he discards the white tile instead, which personally I don't think is good. If I was him, I wouldn't really worry too much about me getting an additional white tile in row 4, since with the token in the next round, I should probably have an easy time completing it anyway, and that way he will require more white tiles himself, which isn't that great. If more white tiles are needed for both players, since his scoring is gonna depend a lot on getting them in the future rounds. I take the black, and he will have to discard the red. So we go out of the round like this, where I complete row 1, 3 and get some progress and a token, and he only gets row 1 and 5, which is practically already very close to a winning game in round 1. In this game against Artin, I get to play against a column 2 start, so he takes white tiles in row 3, which I think, given the runout, is quite a good idea, and very similar to the game where against column 3 that I showed earlier. The best idea is not to take the token because it's too slow of a move, but instead to take the most contested tiles and as many of them as possible. So in this case, that would be to take 2 black tiles and play them in row 4. Now, if he was to try and deny my row 4 completion and get those black tiles for himself, I would of course get 3 yellow and a token, which probably is still his strongest move and strongest idea, since the value of mutually contested tiles is higher than the value of this row 3 yellow and even the token. So he should still take the black tiles and simply stick to his plan of building away. That would probably be his preferred option, but instead he takes out of the middle to take the token himself and doesn't merge for me, which does allow me to immediately take the black tiles away, and already I've disrupted his building quite a bit by getting a good chunk of the most frequent tiles in the first round that both players require. He takes the yellow tiles in row 2, and here I think I can just continue to play a very forcing line, which is to take white tiles in row 3, kind of threatening to complete my row 3 and leaving him stuck. I think in general you would want to take as many tiles as possible. Arguably you could take one tile, white tile in row 3, and accomplish the same and having him discard by having to take 2 tiles to complete his row 3, but I wouldn't really recommend that because you actually require the white tiles, so you wouldn't want, and also if your opponent completes the row 3, you would want an easy time to complete your row 3 in the next round, especially since I don't have the token. Taking more tiles is going to be the better choice. And he responds by taking white tile, and now I can simply fill in my top rows. This decision I think is also quite interesting. So the main decision here is between taking 2 black tiles and 3 red tiles, since those are going to be the most wanted tiles from my opponent. The blue and the yellow is kind of irrelevant, which is why I mainly want to make the choice between which one of these 2 I should take for my row 2. And I opted to take the red tiles, mainly to build a little bit more from the middle, to not be as dependent on red, since it likely becomes a very contested color once my opponent takes the black tiles in row 4, and that way I have a very good shot at building column 2. But taking the black tiles is also fine in row 2 to kind of like disrupt his adjacency and make him very stuck on this row 4, since so many black tiles came out. It might be hard for him to fill in the row 4, and with that he might also lose the option of threatening or scoring whites in row 4 later. So that could also be a strong idea. The only thing that worried me about it was that I don't really have such a great way of playing black tiles anymore, which means that I will likely have to concede a lot of these tiles in to him, not being able to really defend them actively. Though also if I take red tiles in row 2, I don't really intend to play black tiles in row 2 in the next round, so maybe it doesn't make that much sense, and taking the black tiles in row 2 could be the stronger approach. However, I took the red tiles, which is still perfectly fine. He takes the black tiles, and then I of course take a blue tile in row 1. Um, it's not super pretty, but giving my opponent more discards is gonna be the preferred option. And then we leave the round like this, uh, where I complete row 1, 2, 4 and get some progress on row 3, have no structural problems, and he completes row 1, 2, 3 and gets a little bit of progress on row 4 and loses all of his points. So that makes the game quite balanced, if not tilted in my favor a little bit, which is practically all you can ask for in round 1, going as the second player. Alright, here I've got a round 1 against Sunny that I start, which I think provides a good idea of um, when to leave the biggest tile group again. So here we've got 3 yellows that are just laying around that you could immediately plunk into row 3, but um, it's not really such a great option, and I'm briefly gonna show in the sandbox why that is. So if I was to take the yellow tiles in row 3, then he would have the very simple counter of taking white tiles in row 3 himself, and that way he would take out a lot of the relevant column tiles for, let's say, column 4, since it kind of is the most obvious option I could build. While he starts to build column 2, which is a structurally strong column. So I don't really want to play against a strong column being stuck on a weak column. Here maybe my best move is already to just take the blue and the token, and then I wouldn't really get much column progress out of this round, and he would just build very strong top rows and get a column 2 setup that would make great use of the black tiles in row 4, and he can also still score them in row 3 and whatnot, and I'm long term not going to have many good ways of playing them. So that's probably something I would want to avoid, given that he's got quite a strong counter against it, which is why in the game I let him take the yellows and instead took the white tiles in row 4, which is the strongest move. That way I still threaten to take the yellow tiles in row 3. My top row progress isn't really running away, but at the very least I've gotten a good amount of column progress. I can simply build middle column. If he tries to take the token and play it slow, then I can still make a lot of progress on my bottom rows and complete my row 1, 2, 3 on top of that. So his best idea is to take the yellow tiles, and even now there are still 5 yellow tiles in a round and 3 red tiles in a round, giving me the chance to fill in a row 3 with one of those colors later, which again allows me to take the token and also make more progress on my column. And getting the token here is quite nice, because if my opponent now is likely building column 4, we're both gonna need blue tiles in the next round. I would want them in row 3, he would want them in row 4, so that could drive a big gap between us. I take the black, he takes 2 yellow, and here I have a bit of a tactical idea. So first of all, taking yellow tiles I think is quite important for me in row 2. Given that 8 came out, I don't really want to be stuck and struggle to get central building going, since they may not come out, or they may come out in ways that will make it hard for me to actually get good building going. So I think taking the yellows is structurally a strong idea, but also by putting out tiles into the middle, I can enter the sequence where I give my opponent the blue tiles for row 4, kind of locking them into building this column. But also in the next round I've got the token, so 4 blue tiles were to come out, with the most common distribution being 2, 1, 1. Then I could disrupt the row 4 progress while getting my row 3. So that is one of the ideas why it's not bad for me to actually just give them the tiles. But additionally, I can now take the white tile, and if he was to deny me the row 4 completion, then I would still get good remaining moves that I can make great use of. So the final situation here, I think I went wrong. Taking the yellow tile in row 1 would have been the strongest move, because that way I would force him to overpair on his top row. If he takes the red tiles, then I would simply get a setup like this, which looks like he got a lot of progress out of the round, but this would still be very advantageous for me, even if it may not look like it, because the tiles that are relevant for my scoring are still going to come out. My column is almost finished, and I've got the token for the next round. So while it looks kind of good for him, he would actually still be quite a bit behind, just because of how structurally weak his board is and how dependent on blue tiles it would be. So that would be one of the lines, or if he instead takes the black tiles away, then I would get the red tiles and I would get a good top row setup, and still have him overpair on his top row. So in game I chose a different line, which kind of followed a different idea. So here I took the red tiles immediately, which aren't that important for my row 3, since in the first round they don't really score that much, and also they don't provide much adjacency, given that I would try and fill in the blue tiles in the next round. So leaving them around and letting my opponent deny them would have been the preferred choice. Now we can take the yellow tile in row 1, and I will have to overpair on my own top row. It was a bit of a mistake, but even this setup is still advantageous for me over what he's got. My main idea was that if he denies the yellow for my own row 1, that he would not be able to play any of the yellow tiles in the next round, which, if let's say 3 yellow tiles come out, I would either get them in my row 3 for free, or I would, or it's practically -4 hanging over his head the entire round. So I thought this would be a good idea, but he gets this strong staggered setup, no discards. I have to discard a few tiles. While this is still favorable for me, I think the other line would have been definitely quite a bit stronger. But I think overall this is still a fairly well played round 1 that gives me an advantage, and kind of shows that you can't just evaluate a round 1 based on the amount of tiles that your opponent gets, but much more so you have to evaluate their board state accurately and understand what they would require, or like the downsides, the structural downsides of it, and what they would require to score well in future rounds. I also briefly want to show a round 1 from nhass that shows a very fun concept later in the round, though the first move is also very similar to the game that I showed versus Xanthias, where I decided to take the blue tiles over the red tiles. Here you've got white tiles that you can immediately grab, and if your opponent was to take the red tiles, you would get 2 black tiles and a token, kind of disrupting their building and making a lot of progress yourself. So once again, the start would be to take to play it like this instead of taking the biggest tile group, but the interesting decision comes later in the round. Yeah, so here the interesting decision begins, where there are a bunch of scattered tiles, both in the middle and on the platform, which kind of puts you in a position where you have to like kind of figure out how to get your top rows, or in what way you would want to get them. But since your opponent has not taken their row 2 either, you wouldn't really want to merge tiles for them, since then they would get the choice on what to take. So he starts by taking red tile in row 1. His opponent takes a black tile, And now he can safely commit to taking the yellow tile in row 2, since it would be the preferred row 2. If his opponent was trying to deny it, then of course he would complete his row 4 and get a great position where the opponent also doesn't have row 2, so taking yellow tile here is quite strong. His opponent makes a bit of a weird move of taking a white tile in row 2, which now leaves nhass with a very interesting decision. Should he complete his own row 2 or deny his opponent's row 2? He opted to deny his opponent's row 2, which I think makes a lot more sense than to finish your own and allow your opponent to finish their row 2, because being stuck on this row 2 on the edge of the board is going to be quite bad for his opponent. If nhass fills in his row 2 in the next round and all the other rows, he can still get very good adjacency, but this row 2 on the edge of the board is actually quite bad, and he can also definitely defend against white tiles in the next round quite well, given that he's got the token, so he can practically apply a lot of pressure on that in the next round and maybe force some moves, because this needs to be unclogged pretty much always. So the question becomes, should he play the white tile or actually discard it? This concept is actually quite common in AI play, and also something that I've done myself a few times in early rounds, but also in round 4 it's actually the most common, though for different reasons, um, which I will probably cover in a later video. So what I'm hinting at here is that discarding the white tile is actually better than placing it, since your board is so clogged going into the next round that you're gonna have a hard time scoring points, or not taking discards rather, if your board is way too clogged. So if you were to place the white tile and the black tile, let's say, then your board could only fit 6 tiles in the next round. And given that there are 20 tiles in a round and you're the first player, that means you're guaranteed to discard a lot of tiles. You're not going to be able to avoid the discards, even if you fill out all of your rows with the colors you desire. So that would be the main problem that he's trying to avoid here by taking the white and discarding it instead of playing it. And now his opponent, of course, has to deny the yellow tile for nhass's row 2. And once again, the same decision for nhass if he should play the black tile or the yellow tile, the black tile, or discard it. And it's gonna be the same thing as before, simply so that your board can stash more tiles in the next round, because this way he could still play 8. That way he could still play 8 tiles in the next round, which probably still means that he's gonna get a few discards, but that gives him a much better chance at actually scoring points in the next round and keeping them, because generally you would prefer to not go down to 0 points again. Happen more commonly would be something like this. It's the top player's move, and they've placed 2 white tiles in row 4. The opponent has 1 white tile in row 3, and the top player has the token. So here I would also argue that discarding the tile, given that you would discard it for free, is better than placing it, simply so that you have more space to play white tiles in the next round and have a more viable defense against your opponent's row 3 completion, because now you can play 2 white tiles in the next round in row 4 and then potentially play more in row 1 or 2 if you need to disrupt it, or at the very least make it hard for your opponent. Also, you can still discard tiles to get a better chance at disrupting your opponent's building in the next round, because the extra white tile doesn't really provide all that much use for you if 17, let's say, were still to remain. The final row 1 I want to show is this game against Michalis, which has quite a crazy round 1 with a lot of clumps. So I think the first move is gonna be somewhat obvious, and it's to take 3. Or maybe it's not super obvious because you could start with red tiles in row 5, but the black tiles are simply the more important tiles, and your row 4 is going to be more important than making progress on your row 5, especially since your opponent doesn't really have great use for the red tiles if you do take uh, black tiles in row 4, since if your opponent was to take the red tiles away, then you could take the black tiles, and your opponent wouldn't really get much value out of this row 5 red if this row 4 black would be very, very hard to accomplish in future rounds, given that all of the black tiles have come out in this one. But he decides to take the red tiles away to not let me just build down column 2, which I think is one way of thinking about it, but he can't really stop it in a reasonable way here, and the better idea would be to take the 3 black tiles and simply play them in row 5, trying to build middle column down the line to get a good board himself, even though he's gonna be building from behind, because he would be able to then either take 2 blue or the token, which would still give him a good board. So instead he takes the red tiles, and in row 2 especially I think this is quite a big mistake, since he kind of left the most valuable tiles on the table, and even though it may not look like I can make much use of the black tiles anymore since I've already taken them in row 4, that's definitely not the right way of thinking about it, since I don't have to build column 2, but I can instead build a very structurally strong board by taking out all of the valuable tiles, and especially taking the tiles that have come out frequently, because if I fill out my board with a bunch of black tiles, then future runouts are going to include less of them, which means that I can still make use of all of the remaining colors in my rows in whatever way I want, which is why generally it's quite important to contest the color that came out the most in some way in round 1. So my obvious play here is to take 3 black tiles. The main question is where would I play them, and in retrospect I think I should have played them in row 3. It seems like a slightly stronger option, because that way I would be able to complete 4 rows in the first round, fill out a bunch of high value squares, and then I would get a very flexible build going into the next round that would allow me to take the game, to build in any way I would want practically. The only downside I saw was that once I played them in row 3, I wouldn't really have such a great way of playing them in future rounds, given that with the low remaining tile count, committing them in row 5 doesn't really seem very appealing anymore, unless I can make sure that I get a very strong shot at the color bonus and the completion of it, since filling out my row 1 and 2 would also be preferred, which is why I decided against it, but it would still be the preferred option. However, what I played was black tiles in row 5, which is also a very strong move that still gives me a big advantage in the round. Here he takes the token, and now I can simply take 2 blue tiles to make sure I get my row 2. If he was to merge the black tiles, I can simply unclog my row 5, and that way I would get 8 out of 8 black tiles in the first round, which would of course be great, given that I can very naturally threaten the color bonus now by still having a way to play them in row 1, 2 and 3, and also in row 4. And alternatively I can just build a column, since I've made a lot of progress on my bottom rows. I'm gonna have multiple options on what column to build, while my opponent hasn't really taken any meaningful tiles. So he took a yellow tile and put it in row 3, which now I could opt to try and contest his tiles more, but I think it's important to clear up my board to have a playable next round. So I took the black tiles in row 5, and I'm by no means locked into building column 2, which might seem a bit worrying because now I'm still stuck on this row 4, and it may look like I would have to build column 2, but I've got many win conditions here, because once I free up this row 4, I can still pivot to middle column, I can still win over the color bonus, I can still win over top row adjacency, and I can also, I'm also in a very, very profitable situation that is practically win-win, because my opponent, they've now kind of committed to column 4, and they've already taken red tiles in row 1 and 2, so they don't really have a great way of playing those tiles anymore, or defending them at all in the next round, which means that if a lot of red tiles come out in the next round, I can just leave them in the round, let them clump, and either he will have to discard them, or I can later fill them in and actually build column 2. So I'm not in such a problematic spot. So I still have a very natural way of getting the red tiles in the second round. If many come out, I can still plunk them in row 5 and just make a normal column setup. That would be quite strong. Or alternatively, I can also just leave them in the round, never really having to commit to the red tiles and letting him defend them through his floor line, for example, not having to make the commitment. So it's quite win-win for me that I don't really have to commit to any particular plan on how to play this round. Now he takes the blue tiles, and I think the final decision is kind of interesting, whether I should take the red tile or the white tiles. The red tile would of course be better for my top row. That way I would get a better setup and better building, but the white tiles are quite relevant to his building. Now the only downside is that I would have to overpay to place the white tiles, and he could discard the red tile for free, um, which makes this a little bit close, I would say. But taking the white tiles in row 1 is still going to be the preferred option, simply to not allow my opponent to make a lot of progress, which is just going to be the stronger idea than giving them the tiles he wants. So we go out of the round like this, where he only gets 6 tiles and I end up getting 11. And the tiles that I did get are actually quite relevant for my own scoring, which makes this a very advantageous round 1 that leaves me at around 70% win probability. Those were all the games I wanted to show in this video, and I hope you enjoyed it and got some use out of it on how to play round 1s.